Leadership for Finance webinar on differing attitudes to working flexibly. It's great to see so many of you on the call today. And the eagle-eyed of you will notice that there are three speakers here and only one host. Unfortunately, my co-host Sarah Griffiths can't make it today because she has very extreme technical difficulties. So you know that that does happen to us all, unfortunately. So bear with me whilst I'm going solo on this. So it's been a few months since we had our last webinar, and that was on stepping out of your comfort zone with confidence, which was all about pushing yourself in your career and what you can do to equip yourself with the confidence to do the difficult things. Since then, it's been a hard time for most of our network in NHS finance, in the NHS finance community. There's some really tough times financially. We're in the middle of planning. Year end is looming, and for many of you right now, month end. I know it's the worst week of the month for us to have a webinar. Apologies for that. And there's really tight resources for the year ahead. That said, we've always had really positive comments from our network that events like this webinar really helped give perspective and give you an hour or so to lift your head up from day-to-day pressures of your job and focus a bit more on yourself and on your direction. So the webinar this week coincides also with International Women's Day, which is this Saturday, the 8th of March. I'll add a link to the official website for you to read up more on that if you're interested. But the theme this year is Accelerate Action for Gender Equality. And it's worth reminding ourselves why this exists and what that means really. But at the current rate of progress, it will take until 2158, which is roughly 5 generations from now, to reach full gender parity. So that's according to data from the World Economic Forum. So focusing on the need to accelerate action emphasises the importance of taking swift and decisive steps to achieve gender equality. And that calls for increased momentum and urgency in addressing these barriers, the systemic barriers to and biases that women face, both in personal and professional spheres. So we're concentrating more on professional, obviously, and let's crack on with today's webinar. Speaking of momentum. So the idea for this came up from one of our speakers, Naomi Kokol, who's on our webinar today. Naomi brought this subject up in one of our webinars last year around the impact of flexible working on one's career. And it's something that just couldn't be answered in one sort of 2-minute answer. So before we do the introductions to speakers, I just want to define what we mean by flexible working. So the official definition is a work arrangement that allows employees to adjust to their schedule to meet their needs. So this can include working from home, changing hours, or working different days. And as most of you will identify with, during the pandemic, flexible working really took off in NHS finance. It used to be very rare. I'm sure many of you will remember and recognise that, but is now widely expected that most of us work in some kind of hybrid fashion. So for the purposes of the webinar today, what we're really talking about, I guess, is more like part-time hours, compressed hours, flexi time, staggered hours, and job share. But I guess we will touch on aspects of hybrid working or remote working as well. And whilst our speakers are sharing their perspective of flexible working around personal childcare responsibilities, we're obviously applying this to any reason why you would want to work flexibly. So that could be wider care and responsibilities or hobbies or other commitments outside of work. So really, we want to focus on how to get the best out of flexible working, regardless what the reason is for it. So without further ado, let's introduce our lovely speakers, and we'll start with you, Naomi.
Hi, welcome everyone. My name's Naomi Kokol. I work as an 8B Senior Finance Business Partner at Manchester University Foundation Trust. So I currently work full-time, but I compress my hours. So I have 2 afternoons off a month. And then I also work 3 days a week on average from home and 2 days a week in the office. The main reason for my current working pattern is a combination of childcare, but also for me, health and well-being, as it gives me the opportunity to fit in exercise as well during the day much more easily than perhaps sort of I could otherwise. And that to me is really important. In the past, I have also worked part-time when my children were much younger. And when I was much earlier on in my career, before I had any children, I actually worked as a temp, used to sort of take on maternity leave covers and things like that, because it would allow me to take time off between contracts to go travelling. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Jenny, on to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Jenny Cousins. I'm the Deputy Director of Finance at the Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital, which is a specialist orthopaedic hospital in North London. I've worked with the Trust for 12 years now. I started in a full-time role as the Deputy Director of Finance, and then after I had my first child 2 years in, so probably about 10 years ago now, I went down to part-time hours, so I now work 4 days per week, Monday to Friday. Myself and the team, we do have hybrid working, so we have a minimum of 2 days, so most people work 2 or 3 days on site, and then the kind of the alternate days off site.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, how many years again have you been working 4 days?
So it will be 10 years now.
10 years. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And you're not alone actually. The I think 86% on the poll said that they work flexibly today. Just since I've had the chance to have a read of it, you're certainly not alone. And Sam, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi everyone, my name's Samantha Newcomb and I work at University Hospitals Plymouth. I work in the financial improvement team, so that involves supporting all the trust-wide productivity and transformation programs. I work 3 days a week and have done for about 5 years now. I choose to work part-time because I want to spend time with my children. And as Naomi said as well, I feel like it's really important for that work-life balance and that mental well-being as well. So yeah, it's not always about childcare. Sometimes there can be many other reasons why people want to work part-time.
Yeah, thank you. I think you're absolutely right. And I've had the benefit of speaking with all three of you to discuss that in more detail, but let's share some of these reasons and also some of the attitudes that you've encountered with the rest of the audience. So since I think I can direct this first of all to, let me go to Jenny first actually. Since you've been working flexibly, what kind of obstacles or negative perspectives have you encountered during that time, if you're comfortable sharing?
I mean, to be honest, obviously I can only speak from my own experience. It has been very well received in my organisation, so I don't really think that I've had necessarily that, that kind of experience of negativity. I've obviously worked in the same role for quite a few years now, and when my arrangement was initially agreed with the then CFO, we were able to work through that together in terms of what that would mean for the role, and there weren't really no problems with that. And then since then, I've had 2 further CFOs that I've worked with who've also been very supportive of the arrangement, and likewise within the organisation. There are other people now also doing flexible arrangements, which I kind of implemented and supported. So from my experience, I don't necessarily think that there has been that kind of, negativity and barriers, but I'm aware that.
Yeah. What's really positive is that your experience has cascaded down, and that's a practice that you've then brought others into and continued on. What about from Sam or Naomi's? Oh, sorry, I think you're on mute. You're on mute by accident.
Yeah. Sorry, no, I was just going to say that I think it's given me confidence over time as well, because of the fact that I have worked with different CFOs, because I think there's that nervousness as well when you're actually doing an arrangement and then you have new people that you then work with, but there has been that kind of consistency in terms of the way it's been received.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I think we all wish it was the same everywhere, but we need to be realistic, I guess, and that isn't the case. What's been your experience, Sam or Naomi, if one of you want to share?
I've definitely come across quite negative comments in my time, not necessarily addressed to myself, but certainly of other people. So there does seem to be some reluctance around compressed hours, and I've heard comments about concerns about whether there's enough presence around, even though you're working full-time hours, and also just comments around needing to be in the office more, even though you can't necessarily get face-to-face meetings. So there is definitely more negativity that I've found, and also around getting promotion if you're only working part-time. I've had that impact me, where I was told that I couldn't get promotion unless I increased my hours from 3 days a week.
Okay. Well, we are going to come on to that. And why do you think, since we're on that subject, why do you think some managers or leaders are so resistant to that? What is it that they're perhaps not seeing that they need to see?
I think, to be honest, some of it is that they don't necessarily have the same pressures in their life, so they don't necessarily understand what a difference it can make to your work-life balance and how you can make it work. I think maybe sometimes there's a failure to sort of acknowledge the benefits you can get. So, for example, actually all the ABs in my team work compressed hours now, but what it means is that we can work harder over the sort of the deadlines, like month-end forecasting, budget setting, to then take back some of that time when it's quieter in the office. So it feels like that's a bit of a win-win that perhaps they're not really seeing. But I think attitudes are getting better since COVID, and having the sort of more sort of flexible hybrid working, where you've got your laptop and you can alter your working pattern a little bit during the day as well. But I think it feels to me like it just needs to move forward a bit more, rather than perhaps sensing that some of that is almost retreating back to more pre-COVID attitudes at times.
Yeah. I think I shared with you when we did our briefing chat about the attitudes I encountered in the I would say sort of late 2000s towards part-time working, when it was like, oh, you know, if you leaving earlier to attend kids' bedtime or whatever, people couldn't help but come out with snide comments around you part-timer, and you never hear, and you know, those sort of microaggressions, even though performance was still in line with everyone else and what was expected. So, you know, we want to make sure that people don't feel that going forward as well. What about you, Sam? Have you encountered negativity or any obstacles when you've been trying to work flexibly?
Yeah, I think the biggest obstacle is you do miss out on some of those kind of training and networking opportunities. If they happen on your non-working day and you can't attend, then you are going to miss out on certain things. I think it's inevitable, and it's one of the disadvantages of flexible working. I do think we still, within NHS Finance, write job descriptions for a 37.5 hour week minimum. So we don't really think about what are the tasks that need fulfilling and how could we break them down. It's kind of an all or nothing situation, and then it's up for the individual to convince the employer of why I think this can be, or how I think it can be broken down. So I think it's still that default position of everybody will work full time, and then you have to justify the part-time working bit and really explain your reasons. And sometimes people don't always want to get into those reasons. I think when you have young children, it's much easier, isn't it, to be able to justify, I have to work part-time because I have to do the school run or whatever it might be. But for everyone, that's not always the reason. And I think for me, that's why I really wanted to come here today and kind of speak up, because it's, for me, it's not just about childcare. I had somebody close to me that very suddenly got taken ill, and it completely changed my view of work. And I was giving so much of myself to work. And even when I was working part-time, that guilt of on my non-working days, knowing everybody else was working really hard and I was missing that big meeting and I couldn't go to it. And that guilt really ate away at me until I had this big realization in my life that I'm not irreplaceable, and everything will happen without me, and it does, and it works perfectly fine. And I'm really lucky. I've got a really supportive team now, and they will cover me on my days off, and it's brilliant development opportunities for them as well to be able to step into meetings that otherwise I would have just gone to as by default. So yeah, there's definitely it can be challenging. I have absolutely been approached and been told that that job probably isn't one I should apply for unless I was willing to go full time. And that's really hard when you're sat there knowing you're capable of a job and watching everybody overtake you can be frustrating. But for me, that work-life balance is more important to me than any role that could be offered.
Thank you. We will come back to the impact that this could have on one's career. And I think, again, at any point, do please raise a question, raise your hand, or put a question in the chat function as well. And just forgot to say that. Sorry, that's with Sarah not being here, and it's thrown me all over the place. But I have some questions to ask the panel in the meantime. But if there's any sort of burning questions that you want to ask, please do pop that in chat or raise your hand, and we can ask the panel directly. Also, well, in fact, all three of you have mentioned some of the support that you get that helps you work flexibly. But what about you yourselves? Like, what tips or advice can you share about the style in which you work that enables you to work effectively flexibly? And quite a few people have put messages already in the chat in answer to my question at the beginning of the webinar around how they do that, so around communication, around being open with your team about flexibility and so on. But what have you found has worked for you during the times that you've worked flexibly? Naomi, do you want to start just bringing that on you?
Yeah, so I think I would say it's thinking through very carefully what flexible arrangement will work for you. So, for example, I know people who will work their 5 days in 4, but for me, that's too intense a 4-day working period, because actually my husband works away in London 3 days a week. So I then have full responsibility for the kids for 3 of those days that he's away. So I was thinking it through to try and work out what would work for me. Hence, my compressed hours are what I would almost term quite mild in terms of I just have 2 afternoons off a month. So that's very easy for me to fit in those extra hours. But then when I'm potentially doing my extra hours, I'm very much a morning person. I could get up really quite early and I'm right on the ball. It's my best time for working. So quite often I will happily work for an hour in the morning before the kids wake up. And that to me means that I can almost be at my best and do that. And then I can fit the hours in to make the flexible working work for me. But then I feel that I'm still delivering really good work for the employer. So it feels like a win-win from that point of view. And again, I would say that because I enjoy the exercise, then again, that really lifts me up and helps me. So the hybrid working again, I'm a big fan of that. And for me, it suits me because I can then maybe do some exercise in my lunch hour that I wouldn't ordinarily do if it was in my office. So it's trying to think through why you're asking for what you're asking for and how it will benefit you and the employer.
Yeah, thank you. Jenny, have you got anything you can share? I think when we discussed this in depth, that's 10 years of learning how to make this work effectively.
That's true. And it's funny actually, because I think if I was here and it was 6 years ago, I think I was really in the thick of it, and it's kind of about survival mode then. And I think now I've done it that bit longer, and having been through the kind of changes of COVID, I definitely feel like I've learned a lot over that time, and I've kind of come out of it in a different way, I suppose. And also the children are a bit older, so it just becomes a bit more easy, in that respect. But I think in terms of the way I kind of manage it, really the key things would be I'm very organized. I think you have to be when you know that you're not going to be in for one day each week. And I feel like I'm always horizon scanning. I think that's really important, because what I really don't want is for those surprises, because the diary is naturally going to be more compressed because of the hours that I work. So yeah, I'm not great with surprises, but we have to live with those sometimes. So yeah, there's a lot of horizon scanning. I do just basics. I do put my out of office on a Friday. I'm not in the office, and more often than not, that's people know. So then they'll know to kind of follow ups next week. And I think the reality for me has been that when I was first doing the kind of the 4 days, I was much more restricted. So I had to be much more restricted on, because in reality there will always be extra work. But it's a balance of that. So in those early days, I would try and find time in the evenings, when the kids are in bed, whatnot, to be finishing things off. I was always very, very clear that my Friday was the day that I was going to be with my children. That was the balance that I needed to kind of satisfy myself, I suppose, that although I was doing a good job, I was also being the kind of parent that I wanted to be. And I'm happy I can look back on that and think, yeah, I did that okay. If you'd asked me at the time, I probably thought, what on earth am I doing? But now
I'm sure I did ask you
okay.
at the time, and you said exactly that.
But yeah, now I'm out of that. It's so now it's different, and therefore I have a bit more flexibility in terms of, obviously I'll pick things up in the evening, but it's not relentless. I think someone's asked the question in the comments about how do you avoid doing a full-time job and always getting paid part-time, and again, back to with the CFOs that I've worked with, we've had those conversations, but in all finance jobs there's kind of an endless amount of work, isn't there? So it's the balance of, you do what you need to do to deliver the role, and but the way I've been able to kind of manage it with those little things, and having a good supportive CFOs and a good team has enabled me to kind of deliver it. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think Holly has asked a question in the chat. Holly, do you want to put your camera on to ask it more directly to Jenny, or do you want me to ask on your behalf?
I don't mind. Thank you. I finished my lunch now,
right.
so I'll come on screen. I suppose Jenny's just kind of answered some of it in her response that she's just given. I suppose it's, from the people I know within the system I work in, deputy directors seem to be the busiest role in terms of operational. Deputy director of finance, I know, working ridiculous hours, and then doing that part-time. How does that balance, and is that something that you've seen before and it is familiar with you in kind of peers in your area, and how do you manage to stop that? I suppose because knowing that people are put off sometimes from that progression because of that kind of all of a sudden perceived expansion of work and busyness.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to pick the right organisation, and like I say, this was something that worked in the organisation that I worked in, and that the structure of the team around me in terms of my direct reports, I have a very competent team, and so there's something about the role and the structure that you've got to support that I think, and I think there are other deputies that have flexible working arrangements. I'm not aware of any necessarily that do work part-time. So yeah, I mean, I think again, for me it was different because I was doing the role, I think, and that's the bit that even I kind of do question myself about sometimes, in terms of if I was looking to move into a different role, how would it work? Would it be different in a different organisation? Because I'm sure it would be. Yeah, and I think that's, for me, it's the bit about when you're in a job and you're doing the job, and then you do it part-time. I think that's slightly different to applying to do a job part-time. I think there are still difficulties there, I would say.
Thank you.
Thank you. Naomi, you've put your hand up. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, so it's not at the level of the deputy like Jenny, but when I was on a course recently and chatting to a few different people, someone said that when they take on a new job, and they've done it several times and they've requested part-time working, they've then taken the job description and sat down with their manager and said, so what part of the job am I not doing? So for them, they said that's always worked really well for them, so they can very clearly, it's a very clear message about what part of the job you're not doing, and therefore hence you're not falling into the trap of doing 5 days worth of work but only getting paid 4 for it and constantly being really stressed about it. So I thought personally that was quite a good tip to potentially take forward.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions that have come up on the chat, but before we go into them, because I quite like Charlotte's most recent question as well. Sam, do you want to add anything about what's worked for you? You mentioned something very similar to Jenny actually, in that you give the opportunities to people in your team and it allows them a bit more exposure and helps their development as well. So that's very much along the win-win. But anything else that you do that's meant that's helped you be successful in your flexible working arrangement?
Yeah, I think one of the things for me that I found works well, both for me and for the employer, is I've split my working week. So I work 3 days. And so I have a Monday and a Thursday off. And what that means, if anybody picks up the phone and needs me on a Thursday, my team only ever have to say, if they can't answer the question, she's back in tomorrow. And I think being able to say that means nobody feels like they're having to wait a long period of time. If I worked Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and somebody phoned on a Thursday morning and she's not back until next week, it feels like there's more pressure on my team to have to deal with that. Often although it is only 2 days, people will see it as 4, and people are generally quite impatient for information. They need it to be able to make their decisions. So yeah, splitting that week I feel has worked really well for me. Sometimes it's hard to switch between that kind of me mode and work mode. So that can be quite tricky by splitting your week. But I do think the benefits of that have outweighed the negatives.
Yeah. Thank you. And coming back to Jenny and some of the and Holly's point, I think was a very fair point. And I've thought a lot about this, Jenny, as well, in some of the conversations we've had. Whether it is not the norm that the deputy role would be part-time, but you've made that work, and you've made that work over a long period of time. This is not something that's a flash in the pan. And my question around that is, is it because you're superwoman? I have massive respect for you, and partly it is that. But I think we're kind of all superwomen in our own ways anyway. Everyone's has their strengths. I know you're exceptionally well organized, but having that support above and having clear boundaries which you work to, and having the support of a really strong team that you've built, developed, and you have the loyalty from, I think are all things that feed into this. Things are never sort of always plain sailing like that, and you might just need one of those things to fluctuate a bit, and that makes it a more difficult balance to get again. But I think what part of the reason why we have these webinars is to showcase that this kind of activity is possible. And perhaps if you're working in a different region, you might not know Jenny, you might not know that she's working on this basis and making a really good job of it. So it is about sometimes just being aware that these arrangements exist and people have made a success of them, and continue to do so. And likewise for you, Sam, and Naomi as well. There's a question here from Charlotte. Charlotte, do you want to put your video on to ask, or do you want me to ask? If you're mid-sandwich or something, then that's fine. I can ask on your behalf. And I think it's a really relevant question.
Hi.
Oh. Hi there.
Hi, Nicola. How are you? Yeah, so I was really interested to know if any of you had actually applied for a role that's advertised as permanent and said, I want this role, but I'm going to do it in 4 days, or I'm going to do it in 3 days, and still got that job, or had you moved into being part-time at an existing place? Because I think the birth scenario is a lot harder to convince people.
Sam.
Yeah, so the current job that I'm doing is not the job that I started when I went to part-time. So we had a big team restructure. So there were lots of jobs and lots of moves going on at the same time. But I went and spoke to each of the managers and sort of said, I am 3 days a week and that's what I want to continue doing, and had a real deep conversation about how would that job description that's advertised, how would it be amended based on me working a 3-day week. And that kind of led me down the path of which role did I think that in all honesty was a 3-day a week role, not a 5-day a week, or I'd then be paid for 3 days a week. And that's something that's always really worried me with going for new roles. I don't want to feel guilty or feel massively stressed because I'm not being paid for those extra days. So if I'm not being paid for it, I shouldn't feel guilty for the fact that I'm achieving so much within my 3 days. If I'm working at an 8B or an 8C, it doesn't matter whether you do it 1 day a week or 5 days a week. That should be the level you're at. So I've been really encouraged by my current manager. She's been really supportive. She completely understands my reasons behind. So same with Jenny. I think without that support it would be really difficult, but she totally gets it, and we managed to work out a way that role fitted in with that. And kind of my team below me as well, they are also really supportive, and nobody ever comments about the fact that I'm not there for a certain meeting. I've got a big one that's coming up next week and it's on my non-working day. And without me even asking, my team stepped up and said, that's all right, we'll cover that. Don't worry, what do you want us to pick up? So I think it's about having that real trust and building the relationship both with your manager and any of your peers that you work with as well, to be able to confidently not attend something, rather than all the prep is always on you, isn't it? But prepping somebody else is quite a different situation, and you have to do more of that, I'd say, as a part-time worker.
Should I come in now? I think, to be honest, Charlotte, I think I would agree. So I moved to a part-time arrangement in a role I was already in, and I think that is different to obviously applying for a role on a part-time basis. And I think it is really difficult because I think there is something about showing that it can be done. I think sometimes, and it shouldn't have to be that way, but sometimes people just need to see it to see that things can be done in a different way. I work in a small organisation and it works here, but then I sometimes think, even in a bigger organisation, maybe then, you have more deputies, so possibly there's more opportunity to spread things around differently, and sometimes it's just, having kind of seeing it work, but also just being open to thinking about things in a different way. And like I say, within my team, I really do try and, accommodate those kind of things as much as possible.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. Great question. A question, because I think it can be difficult to ask or find the right time to ask for flexible working. Are there any other examples or experiences that you can give around when is the best time to approach your employer around working flexibly, particularly if there's no prior blueprint to how this has worked successfully? So thinking again, if you worked in Jenny's team, that might be an easier question right now to take on. But if you've moved to an organization where that's never happened, where there isn't a very proactive attitude towards flexible working, when and how should you ask that question to get the result that you're looking for?
I can be absolutely, because I'm not sure it's so much about the way. I suppose for me there is something about kind of showing how it can work. As the person making the request, I think it's going to be much easier for a manager to review if you can kind of show how it can be done. And so I'm not so sure about the timing, but I think that's part of it as well. I think there is something about, can you make the case? Because I think I'm sure for most of us, it really is about being able to do the job, isn't it? It's about delivering the role and showing that you can still deliver the role, but in a different way, whether it's with less hours or with compressed hours. So I think that's the key for me, is about kind of really showing how that can be done.
Yeah.
I had an informal discussion with my manager first to say, this is what I'm considering doing. This is how I might see it working. Is this sort of something that you know, we think would be a possibility. And then I went to formalise it through a formal request for adjustments to my working pattern. I know you can go straight to filling in a form that your manager is required to answer, but I would probably advise that it's easier initially to have that discussion informally with your manager, because they might come out with things as to suggestions as to actually this might not quite work like that, but what about working it like this, for example, so that then you can have that collaborative agreement to make sure that it is a successful working pattern.
Yeah, okay. No, those are good ideas. Thank you. So I had a client recently who said to me that a request for someone in this person's team to work flexibly was looked upon negatively as, and the main reason being, well, if we allow it for this one person, then everyone will want to do it. Can we discuss the pros and cons of that and how to counter that kind of reaction? And I think, you know, again, that's in an environment where perhaps this hasn't been the blueprint. There hasn't yet been a successful case study of how someone can make flexible working work and still be productive and deliver what they need to deliver in that situation. But how do we encourage, or how do we overcome those kinds of attitudes towards flexible working?
I personally would love to work in a team full of part-time workers. I feel part-time workers that I come across are very very motivated. They're very skilled at organising their time. I know Jenny's touched on it a few times already. You have to be organised. Your meetings have to be the right length of time. You can't afford to just let them overrun, because an hour of your week as a percentage is much higher than a full-time worker's. So I think that there is so much more that part-time workers can bring to the table. Like I say, with the organisation skills, just a different viewpoint for somebody that isn't kind of in the nitty gritty of it all the time. Sometimes on my non-working days, I come up with my best work ideas. So my job is all about productivity and transformation. And sometimes it's when you're just on a walk or you're playing at the park with the kids, and all of a sudden, because I'm free of all the stress of the work environment and I'm not jumping from one meeting to another, an idea will just pop into my head and I just write it down on my phone, and then that's me ready the next working day. I can go in with my new idea and say, I've had to thought about this. Has anybody else ever thought of it, ever done anything? So I would love to see more organisations with lots of part-time workers. I don't know why it's always the exception. Why can't we make it the norm to have flexible working? Pre-COVID, the number of people that did any work at home was virtually zero. And now look at us, we all work at home at some point within our week. So why can't we take that same approach for part-timers?
I absolutely agree. And I think if that wasn't the case, Sam, we'd be cutting out a massive part of the working population that we would want to attract over the next 10 to 20 years as well. So in order to keep up with the times, I think we need to demonstrate that the NHS and NHS finances is an employer that does embrace flexible working and gets the most out of it.
Yeah.
Jenny or Naomi, do you have a view on that?
I think in terms of the kind of multiple requests, I think it does come back to the fact that can the role be delivered? So I think there's not necessarily an issue with having multiple requests, but it's each individual is there to do a job, and it's about does that specific request, does it allow them to still deliver the job, or a kind of certain changes required, and then how do you cover those? So people can put working requests in now, but I suppose we just have to view them on that basis of, does this still mean that as a team we are still able to deliver what we need to deliver? And if not, that's something that needs to be worked through, because that's kind of ultimately what we're there to do, really, is to we've all got a role that we need to do.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, there's other factors as well, isn't there, that sort of to help support the request and overcome the resistance. So perhaps it's about you know, and I've never thought to look into this, but days off sick, do you have fewer days off sick if you're sort of part-time or work flexibly compared to full-time? Because maybe you don't get so burnt out, so stressed. It's that motivation that's Sam referenced, all those ideas that you do get off because you've stepped away from your desk a little bit. You've got a bit more like thinking time in a way. And also there's that benefit, again referencing Sam, or even in Jenny's role, where people underneath them, they can step up and gain some extra responsibility, so then they're more motivated and they get a better work experience. So then it's expanding your talent pool, or potentially, you know, if you can show as well that you have these options. So I joined my current organisation only 18 months ago, and I actually honestly went to the interview a bit unsure whether I was going to take the role. I knew I wanted to get a new job, but I really wasn't convinced when I went to the interview. But then a big part of the reason was actually realising that my manager had the sort of compressed hours. They were very open to that idea. And that actually is probably one of the things that sealed it for me in terms of the move over to my new organisation. So there's definite benefits that I do feel people need to be a bit more open to. And I think generally, you know, you can spot the dedicated finance people, and you know, dedication, motivation all goes a long way to just overcoming any perceived hurdles with flexible working arrangements.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And I think in the meantime, it means that there are, even though during the pandemic there was a lot more flexible working, I think still it is, you know, for you guys and people that you've probably seen in other organizations as well, very much trailblazing, and showing that this can be done in order for it to be something that's more widely adapted and becomes more the norm going forward. Um, Amelia Webber, you've just asked a really good question around any advice on compressed hours, rather than working part-time. If you're there, can you put your video on? I don't know if you want to expand a bit more on what kind of advice you'd actually like how best to fit that in, or how best to ask for that, or how best to make sure that that you don't end up working the same amount of time but just getting paid for less.
I think a lot of us already work really long hours, kind of beyond our 9 to 5 ordinarily. So it feels like putting in that request and saying, you know, I'll still work those same hours over 4 days might be badly received. And I just wondered if anyone had experience of how to do that, because it would be, you know, obviously the perks to doing that in terms of having the time. Having that time back, but it feels like a really difficult ask compared to asking to work 4 days and being paid for 4 days, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really good question. We had quite bad signal there. Did all of you pick that up? That the question was around if you're working compressed hours, the NHS does typically work long hours anyway. So how, if in circumstances where that could be quite badly received because people expect that your working day might be more than 7.5 anyway, what's the best way to work around that? I mean, personally, I think it comes back to delivery, output, productivity. But any views from the panel?
Quite a hard one to answer. I think I've always been very clear on boundaries, and if I feel the workload is unmanageable, I would be having a meeting with my manager and going through priorities and what you do or don't do. So you're dropping a meeting here, a meeting there, or so in a way I've never gone down the route of almost working hours of overtime. So therefore then trying to fit in compressed hours, I've not struggled with that. But I'm not sure I can help with that very much. I just keep myself really organised, and I'm just really clear on my work boundaries, I think. Yeah, sorry.
Jenny, you look like you were going to come in, or was that me just being wishful thinking?
I'm just pondering it myself, to be honest, because no, it is a difficult question. I mean, there is something about, I suppose we all want to keep good people in our teams, don't we? And it's, and actually it isn't easy to recruit into, certain roles. So I think it's worth having the conversation, because you as Naomi was saying, actually that shouldn't be the norm, that you're on a regularly working or consistently working significantly more hours. So and I know that happens, but on a consistent basis that shouldn't really happen. So it sounds like there's something about the kind of structure anyway. I mean, I have someone in my team who works compressed hours, and that's partly linked to their where they live, and that works well. And I have to say that I think they would work. I do have to kind of keep a bit of an eye on, because I know they do work probably more than they will be logging on the day they're not supposed to be working, and that kind of thing. But there's definitely benefits in compressed hours as well, and I think that especially around location, to be honest, I think that's and there's a big benefits of access to different people, I think.
Yeah, I think there's a bigger discussion around expectations as well. So, why should a role be expected to be longer than 7.5 hours if it's 7.5 hours a day in the contract? And if we're in a situation where there's mass huge problems around sickness and work-related stress, then perhaps those two things are linked. So, it's not that much of a jump in understanding, is it? So another question that I was thinking of as well. So we've showcased 3 really successful working parents working in a flexible way. What For whom or for which roles or for what kind of people would flexible working not be appropriate, or where would it not work? It's worked for you 3 and for various different reasons, and part of that might be who you're working for, where you're working, how organised you are, how supportive your bosses, or how strong your team is beneath you. But where is it not quite right, and how have you experienced this, either from within your teams or from conversations you've had with others?
I think for me, part-time working has worked well because I've managed to find a role that's very project-based, and we're a small team and we choose our projects and how we kind of take those forward. So that flexibility is much easier in those sorts of roles. I think the sort of roles where you struggle is where you have very senior people who are perhaps full-time, who just need you to be on the end of the phone with the answers kind of there and then. And although I think that's seen as a barrier, I don't think it should be. So I think the perception is you can't do that role because we need you to be at the manager's beck and call. But actually, I think there's something more there around kind of educating and why are the requests for this information? Why are the turnaround times so slow? And why aren't we? I think Jenny mentioned at the start about horizon scanning, and why aren't we able to see that piece of work coming? Why is it a sudden phone call, drop everything and do this? But certainly in my organisation, we're not there yet. So I think there is more we need to do around education, which does restrict quite a few of the roles for part-time working, which I think is a real shame. I think we are missing out on really talented individuals who just won't apply for a job because they feel like they will be called on their non-working days.
I think you're right. We're a long way off from horizon scanning being the the way that everyone works in the NHS. It's just, sometimes it is very reactive. I'm sure everyone in this call sort of nodding their heads, thinking about perhaps the planning round at the minute and what that means. Naomi, any view on who it wouldn't work for?
I think it comes down to the communication, the organisation of the individual. So I think if those two were either lacking between the individual and maybe their manager, that's where it would most likely break down. I think there's not very many job shares out there in the NHS. I don't really know the reasons for that, but perhaps some of it is around the issues that you have with that. Maybe it's difficult to find someone to gel with appropriately to do the job share. I'm not sure. But I do feel that it should be able to work in most jobs, if not all jobs, but it's having the willingness for it to happen on both sides.
Yeah, I think you're right. That willingness to make it work, often something that's different is perceived as difficult, and awkward. And actually, what you want is someone to, I think, I can't remember which one of you said this when we did our pre-briefing, is to work out a way to, okay, that's great. You want to work flexibly. How can we make this work? Not, oh, this doesn't work here. We've tried it before and it's not going to work. So, you know, those kind of attitudes, and actually thinking if the benefits are we still get the same productivity, delivery, the employee won't get burnt out. They'll be a happier, more well-rounded employee, and we still retain them for longer term career development, then surely those are all reasons to want to reach a solution that's that works for everyone. So my final question, unless and perhaps you can incorporate if you had something else to add on that, Jenny, as well, is around the impact that that working flexibly can have or has had personally on your career, and just any sort of tips and perspectives that you'd want to share on that.
So, I mean, I think, to be honest, it's possibly one of the reasons that I've stayed where I am for as long as I have, because I've been able to agree the arrangements that I have, and equally that I know that I can deliver the role. In terms of the previous question, I suppose I would still question whether the CFO role could be done in a kind of flexible way, and that's something that I've kind of, you know, previously thought about, and many people say that's, you know, not necessarily true, but I still would question it myself, I think. But I think otherwise, it's the balance that you know, from my experience, it's allowed me to do the job in the way, you know, I'm very happy with the way I've done it, and also I'm very happy with the way I've been able to spend time and with my family. So it's always been about both for me. Yeah,
and that's a very personal decision, isn't it? It's what's right for you might be very different to what's right for someone else. And so yeah, I guess my question for you then is, would you have done it any other way, looking back, or are you comfortable with the choices that you've made?
Yeah, no, but yeah, 100%. No, I'm very, very happy, and that's what I want to continue. You know, I want the next 20 years to have the same, you know, view. But no, I'm very, very happy. So I was talking to someone who said, actually, you know, some people kind of continue with their careers and they're very ambitious in that respect. But actually, what I'm ambitious for both myself and my career, but also my family. And I think the decisions that I've taken have allowed that to kind of work.
And careers are long. I'm not sure how old you are. I think you're still quite a bit younger than I am. So.
And childhoods are short, and that's the thing that I always remember. They still want to be with me at the moment.
That's true. Sam?
Yeah, I think for me, I wouldn't change working part-time at all. I absolutely love my work-life balance, and I really look forward to those non-working days. It breaks up my week. Like you say, it just gives me the headspace. I think it makes me a better employee. It makes me better at my job having that time. And for me, giving up that time with my children, it wasn't even really on the cards. I kind of said it at the start. I do get frustrated sometimes that working part-time holds me back. I've had comments of, oh, I didn't think you'd want that role because you're part-time, or it kind of feels like you're not quite on a career break, but you're cruising for a minute until your children get older. And I think that is quite a common perception of part-time workers, is that you're quite happy to just bumble along whilst your kids are young, and that's not always the case. I know that I'm good at my job and I know that I'm capable of more, so there is that frustration there for me, but ultimately I'm not willing to go up in my hours at this point in time. And like you say, careers are very, very long, far too long in my opinion. We should all be able to retire at 55. But yeah, so you know, who knows where I'll be in 10 years' time once, you know, my children are stroppy teenagers and they don't want to spend time with me anymore. Maybe that's the point that I change my mind in terms of the number of hours that I want to work. But I just know for me right now, this is absolutely the right decision and I wouldn't change it.
Yeah, I think you've done really well. I like how you've learned a new area as well in going part-time, going to much more of a project-based role, which, maybe you wouldn't have done that otherwise. So yeah, it is about thinking, right, look what I've benefited from or I've learned during this time, and at the same time done what is important to me, which was to be present for your family. Yeah, and Naomi?
I would echo what Sam said. I don't regret any of the working patterns I've had, but I suppose linking in with the start of the webinar where we talk about International Women's Day and accelerating change, what would be nice to see off the back of this and is actually getting to the point where it's no longer a barrier to career progression. So someone like Sam could work for 3 days in a higher band role, still have her days off to suit her work-life balance. And that's, I think, what would be nice to try and get from this webinar, to push that message really, that it doesn't have to be a barrier going forward. We can make it happen.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, on that note, it's just hit 1 o'clock, so I'll just do a really brief summary. For those that do want to stay on, we may be staying on for about 5 to 10 minutes just to continue with the chat. If anyone wants to stay on, ask any of the speakers a question directly. But thank you so much for everyone for joining today on the call. Hope you got something out of it. You heard some views, perspectives, perhaps some role models that inspired you. Personally, I think it's a really interesting discussion around some of those sort of attitudes, like you say, the negativity around, are you just coasting in this role? But really, hopefully what's come across here is actually how the workforce can benefit, and hopefully how the employer can benefit as well by I guess sort of moving with the times really, into a more sort of modern workforce who are able to manage their work-life balance and still be productive and still be focused on what they're able to achieve, and still have one foot in their career, even though it might not be quite going at that point where some people feel it should be. If it's going in the right place for you at that time, then that's appropriate, and that's all we can ask. But I think, again, continuing on from International Women's Day theme, this is all about continuing that momentum, and hopefully moving towards a much more change and more positivity around flexible working in the future. So thanks everyone for joining. Please do continue to recommend this to your friends and your colleagues. We do still want more men to attend our Women in Leadership webinars. The gender inequality isn't just a women's problem. It needs to be solved by women, as we all know. So please do recommend it to your male colleagues as well. And thank you everyone for attending. So please do ask any more questions if you want to stay, and if you need to dash off for lunch, then also do. I'm just checking that I've stopped the recording, which I can't actually seem to do. There, I've managed to stop it now. Great.